again, I'm Pastor Brian Madden, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Grady McMurtry with us. And Dr. McMurtry, thank you for answering the previous questions in such an eloquent fashion. May I be permitted to continue? Because the next question is something that is fascinating for me, and something that's fascinating for my young daughter, who's constantly having debates in her school with her science teacher. And the question is this: evolutionists will claim that no human has ever saw a dinosaur. So may I ask you, what is the truth about dinosaurs and humans?
Well, I want to build on our previous conversation that I grew up on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley.
Yeah.
Now, when I was not in public school, the government-run schools, learning about evolution, and that's all they taught me in the 1950s, I can assure you, was evolution only. But when I was not in the government school learning about this as a child, I used to spend my time in the paleontology laboratories at the University of California, Berkeley, and I was learning about dinosaurs and fossils and evolutionary theory when I was only in elementary school, and learning from PhDs. And so I learned about those things so well that by the time I hit the third and the fourth grade, they used to borrow me from one classroom to the other in the California public school system, and I used to teach the other children about dinosaurs, fossils, and evolutionary theory, because I knew more about it than the teachers did. And that's absolutely a true story. And so, obviously, I grew up thinking in terms of evolution, dinosaurs. No person ever saw a live dinosaur. Yes. They had died out long before we came along, supposedly in the evolutionary timescale. And I grew up teaching that. However, today we clearly know that that's not true. We have all kinds of evidence that proves, first of all, if we think biblically, dinosaurs and their relatives are mentioned 11 times in the Old Testament. So dinosaurs and their relatives. Now that includes marine reptiles, such as the Leviathan is mentioned 5 times in the Bible. The description of Job 41 is clearly a large marine reptile. Yep. Behemoth, mentioned in Job chapter 40, verse 15 and on, is clearly a large air-breathing, land-dwelling dinosaur recorded after the flood. Psalm 91 speaks of a dragon in many translations, Russian translation, Portuguese translation, some English translations. And dragon is just the ancient word for dinosaur. Yeah. Remember that the word dinosaur did not come into existence until Sir Richard Owen named them that in the UK in 1841. And the word doesn't mean terrible or thunder lizard, it means awesome lizard. Awesome. And he named them awesome lizards because in 1841, Sir Richard Owen believed that they were part of God's awesome creation. However, we also find them mentioned in Isaiah. Now, one reference to Leviathan in Isaiah, but we also find 2 to flying reptiles, flying serpents, flying dragons. Again, it depends on the translation of the language that's being used. And so we have the references that they were created on day 5, Genesis 1:21. Created on day 6, same with people, the land-dwelling ones, Genesis 1:24. That dinosaurs and people lived together, which was not a problem. Yeah. Because if you take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30, all land animals, dinosaurs, dogs, I don't care what it is, and people were created as vegetarians. And now today we can prove scientifically that T-Rexes were vegetarians. If you think about it, sharp teeth, sharp claws do not a meat eater make. If you simply take the examples of koala bears, panda bears, fruit bats, we have all kinds of creatures that we could pick up. As a matter of fact, I would challenge anybody that is listening to this program, if you don't believe what I'm saying about sharp teeth and sharp claws do not indicate that a creature is a meat eater, then I would suggest you get on the internet and go to some image search program. We're not going to advertise. And look up Chinese water deer or Himalayan musk deer. Now these are 2 tiny, cute, cuddly little deer. I mean, you just want to walk up and hug them. But take a look at the pictures of their teeth and you'll back off. You see, they have tusks like a walrus. Wow. Wow. But they use those teeth because they live in swamps and so forth to pull up tough vegetation. Chinese water deer, okay? Yeah. And the vegetation is very matted, and so they use those tusks like a walrus digs for clams with those tusks and then crunches them with their teeth, the water deer pulls up the vegetation, and then it can chew it and eat it with its grinders.
Incredible.
And the Himalayan musk deer, the teeth are probably even more pronounced. And yet, when you look at them, you'd say, "Oh, this is a cute, cuddly little vegetarian," and it is. It's 100% vegetarian. And so today we now know that T-Rexes were in fact vegetarians.
Yes.
And evolutionists today will actually agree with this. Now, I know there are science teachers where they haven't been current on their information and so forth, and wouldn't. But the upper level evolutionists today will tell you that in fact T-Rexes were vegetarians. The largest tooth of a male T-Rex is 10.5 inches long. That's right there. And it has a sharp point. But it has a shallow root, only 4 inches out of the 10.5. T-Rex teeth have serrations on the sides, front and back. Now those serrations are not necessary for eating meat. They are necessary for cutting through thick, fibrous, tough vegetable material like celery, or eating palm fronds or something like that. And recently we found fossil grass in a fossil T-Rex. Again, did people ever see dinosaurs? Well, the Bible tells us that they were created with people, that they lived with people to the flood, and God sent them to Noah. God sent one pair of each unclean kind that lives on dry land and breathes air through nostrils.
Yeah.
That's the requirement. So there were no fish on the ark. There were no whales on the ark, of course. There were no insects that were sent to him. And aren't you glad he didn't take termites? I also find it very difficult to believe that you could have 2 elephants on the ark without some fleas, but nonetheless, that's another story. But there were no amphibians, because insects and amphibians survived on the floating debris of the flood, and were not sent to Noah. Only those creatures that live on dry land and breathe air through nostrils. So that eliminates the insects and amphibians. What you would have is only the dry land reptiles, because some reptiles live in the water, but only dry land reptiles. Dry land mammals, again, you don't need whales, but you would need horses. You would have the birds, and you would have 8 people. But this would include dinosaurs. You have to remember that while from 1824 to 2004, 1,401 names have been given to different dinosaurs. People think that there's thousands of them, but really only 1,401. However, in 2004, evolutionists and creationists came to an agreement when they again realized themselves that, atheists always want to get immortality. Did you ever notice that? They don't believe in God, but they always want immortality.
Yes, of course,
And how does an atheist get immortality? Well, when you find something, you name it after yourself. Well, that's how evolutionists and atheists get immortality. And so what had happened was somebody had dug up a baby and named it after themselves, and then somebody dug up an adolescent and named it after themselves, and then somebody dug up an adult and named it after themselves. And we had 3 and as many as 4 names for the same dinosaur. And so the list was, in 2004, reduced back to 668. However, some recent discoveries have added a couple to that. However, of those, you can easily group them into 50 to 55 different kinds. Now, what did God send to Noah? 1 pair of each kind. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
So you would only need 100 to 110 animals that are called dinosaurs, 50 to 55 breeding pairs, on the ark to get all the dinosaurs you'd ever need, and then reproduce afterwards. And we have the 9 references to dinosaurs or their relatives after the flood.
Yeah.
However, we also have reliable human history of people and dinosaurs living together. Now, for example, the Old Testament has these references, and the Old Testament closes, as we sometimes say, approximately 400 BC. At that time, there's an incredibly important Greek man who is an evolutionist, but he is so important he's called the father of history. His name is Herodotus. And in his writings, Herodotus writes about flying reptiles.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds very much like Rhamphorhynchus in his description, which is a small flying reptile that we know of from the fossil record. 100 years later, for example, Alexander's leading his armies towards India, and they see dragons. If you're going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must read the first century Christian historian, the Apostle Luke. But if you're going to be a serious student of the Bible, you must also read the first century non-Christian historian, Flavius Josephus. And Josephus also records flying reptiles, that they lived in Arabia and Egypt and migrated and so forth. And what's really intriguing to me about Josephus's account, and he's considered to be an excellent historian, in his rendition, he records that they lived in holes in the ground but flew through the air, and the description of them is very much like Rhamphorhynchus, the small flying one. But I find this interesting that it was only a few years ago when we found what I might label as fossil dinosaur burrows. We've actually found where small dinosaurs dug holes in the ground, like foxes, and lived in dens in the ground. Now, Josephus records this 2,000 years ago, but we didn't find it until recently. So, unless his imagination is incredible, what he's really recording, I think, is real things, and then we're only finding out now that he was right, But there are many other references to this. But Marco Polo describes large two-legged dinosaurs in China 700 years ago. In 1611, a very famous year in the UK, we actually have the official court records of the Emperor of China hiring a royal dragon feeder. Now, I think that you will agree with me, in the Orient, especially Japan and China, so dragons are ubiquitous in literature, lore, etc. Anybody who's ever eaten at a Chinese restaurant has probably seen a placemat with the Chinese calendar, which is a 12-year cycle of 12 different animals. I find it depressing. I was born in the year of the dog. But I've never had a problem with it. And, but think with me for a second. There are 12 animals in the Chinese zodiac. 11 of them still exist today. The 12th is the dragon. But if the other 11 were real at the time that the zodiac came into existence, why wasn't the dragon real?
Of course.
And we have found creatures. There's a find of a new dinosaur species we found in Hell Creek in the Dakotas in 2003. The nickname is Dragon King. Not Tyrannosaurus rex, but Dragon King. The technical name is Dracorex hogwartsii, obviously named after the Harry Potter movies. But when you see the skull of the creature, it would be the quintessential shape of a dragon head, So you can easily see that while, of course, most dragon stories are myth, we must remember that myth always starts in reality. Always starts in reality. Whether it's the unicorn from an animal like a deer or an antelope with one broken horn, or the narwhal or whatever it is, myth always then starts in reality, from a single horn to the unicorn and so forth. Well, these stories, obviously many mythological in Southeast Asia, but are based in people having seen, having remembered real, large reptiles. If we go to 1484, in the UK there's a printer named William Caxton. He publishes a book talking about how there was a dinosaur that lived in northern Italy. Now that's 500 years ago. In 1572, we have the records of an Italian scientist actually describing an encounter with one of these creatures that the description, at least, fits about a 9 to 10 foot long dinosaur we know of from the fossil record by his description. In 1496, the Christian cardinal of Carlisle died, Richard Bell, buried in the floor of the cathedral as the custom. His tomb on the top of it has, as you know, and my mother was an Anglophile, and she was an addict about British cathedrals. Well, they're very famous for their brass rubbings. Well, there's a brass plaque on Bishop Bell's tomb which clearly shows two long-necked dinosaurs. That's 1496, 500 years ago. Now, there are other examples, but I would mention one last one, which I think is particularly important because it comes from an evolutionary source. In 1883, the Scientific American magazine, which is devoted entirely to evolution, still in existence today, records a small armored dinosaur dying in Bolivia that year. Now, I think that when an evolutionist tells you that a small armored dinosaur died in Bolivia in 1883, it's worth paying special attention
Yes,
to.
of course it is.
Now, it shows you that people and dinosaurs did coexist, that people do remember seeing them and did record them. And there are others. And when you take a look at the great epic poetries like Beowulf, for instance, and you take a look at some of the antagonists of this literature, you suddenly realize, well, this is a pterodactyl by description in an epic poem. And I would also point out to you that not only have we found fossil dinosaurs and fossil other things, we have now today found mummified dinosaurs. We have found dinosaur flesh. I mean, serious, real dinosaur flesh. This has been verified even by totally evolutionary universities such as Harvard.
Wow.
We have found the flesh in at least 5 different dinosaur skeletons on 3 different continents. T-Rexes, hadrosaurs, and so forth. This is impossible for this material to be 68, 70 million years old.
Of course it is.
You're familiar with canning, as we call it, or preserving things in jars or cans. And I don't know, maybe your mom, your grandmom, maybe she made preserves in glass jars. But think with me for just a second. You can something. I don't care, corn, beans, whatever it is, and put it up on a shelf. Now leave it there for 20 years. Don't ever open it. There is no microbiological, no decay of any kind going on inside because there's nothing alive inside. So it has been pasteurized and there's no bacterial decay. And yet if you look through the glass, you wouldn't want to eat it after 20 years. Think about it. Because the whole thing is starting to simply decompose, not because of bacterial action, it's not being eaten, it's because the molecular bonds are breaking down spontaneously. You see, once something dies, the molecular bonds and the structures of the cells and so forth and everything, they all start to break apart spontaneously. Without life, they won't stay together. There's something special about life.
Oh, yes.
And so when something dies, these molecular bonds spontaneously start to break. And so the thing simply starts to dissolve even without bacterial action. And you wouldn't want to eat it. It's just mush. Well, imagine that's only 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, it is impossible for this material to be 68 million years old and be recognizable in any way whatsoever. And recently we found flesh in a supposedly, and I say again supposedly, we talked about this, the Earth and the universe are young. They're not millions of years old. But according to the evolutionary timescale, we found flesh in an armored fish supposedly 380 million years old. I have pictures of at least 3 fossil octopi, and the ink sacs still have liquid ink inside. You can actually take it and write with it. Well, this is impossible if this material is that old. And so this just gives credence to the fact that people and dinosaurs were created 6,000 years ago, lived contemporaries with each other, wasn't a problem, they were vegetarians. As a matter of fact, in Job, God describes Behemoth as eats grass like an ox. Vegetarian, big animal, tail the size of a cedar tree, clearly a large dinosaur. So they were vegetarians, it wasn't a problem. And some come through the flood with on the ark with Noah, the family. They do start to reproduce after their kind, but because of tremendous environmental changes that occurred at the time of the flood, they were at a great disadvantage. The flying ones, the winged ones, which many of them were gliders, not flyers. Once you get wings so big they couldn't fly, they'd have to glide or soar. And well, because the air pressure dropped at the time of the flood, they're at a great disadvantage. So only the really smaller ones, like Rhamphorhynchus, that could fly like a bird, could exist. The big soarers couldn't fly anymore. Or we now know that there's probably estimates of 90 to 98% of all plant life that ever has existed on the earth is now extinct. Well, if you're a vegetarian, and because of the flood, these plants become extinct, then the food supply that which you were used to is no longer available to you, and you're going to starve. People used to live to be over 900 years old on average. Now, I don't think that's mythology. I think that's reality. I wrote a chapter in my book. I produced a DVD in which I talk about 19 medical and scientific reasons which, taken in combination, would allow people to live to be 900 years old under the environmental conditions that existed at that time. Now, those conditions either don't exist today or they exist to a lesser extent. Now, dinosaurs are reptiles. Reptiles never stop growing. You notice how fish just get bigger and bigger and then they die. Reptiles, they get bigger and bigger and then they die. And so people don't. I mean, we get to a certain height, 18 to 25, and from then on we get shorter, which I find very depressing. But nonetheless, reptiles never stop growing. Now let's think about this. If people were living 900 years, then, for instance, an alligator, I live in Florida, alligators would have been living 600 years under those conditions. And they never stop growing. And we have found fossil crocodiles, fossil alligators in Brazil, in North Africa, reaching lengths of 50 feet.
Wow.
But they aren't that big today, but if you let them grow longer, they would be. So there's lots of ways in which you can kind of think about this. But what happened to the dinosaurs is slowly, gradually, people hunting them. I mean, let's think about this for a second. Which would you rather eat? Try to kill a 3-ton dinosaur that could feed the family for 6 months, has a brain that big, and is easy to kill, or go up against a saber-toothed tiger that now has a taste for meat after the flood. You know, I think I know the answer to this, right? And so what happens is environmental changes, age is getting shorter, so the creatures are getting smaller. And actually that's a proof, by the way, for creation instead of evolution. People hunting and eating some of them. I mean, we eat alligator in Florida. It's a common thing. And there are other people in other places, Australia. Some people eat certain kinds of reptiles and so on. And so because of environmental changes, lack of food supply, change in air pressure, hunting pressures, whatever, slowly and gradually, dinosaurs became extinct. You know, one kind here, one kind there, over centuries of time, but people did live with them. They did record events with them. Until finally today, I know of no dinosaur alive today. Now people talk about, oh, they're here or there, but no. Scientifically speaking, we have no evidence that dinosaurs exist today, but we do have historical record that they lived until recently.
Yes.
And I mentioned about size too. If you think about it, evolution says things get bigger, better, faster, smarter over time. In essence, rocks become alive by random chance, single cells turn into multiple cell creatures, and on. What we actually see in the physical evidence in the earth is that things started off bigger, better, faster, smarter, and because of human sin today, we are all in a state of decay. We're all getting smaller, shorter, slower, dumber over time because of the decay process that was initiated by human sin in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I would say at this moment in time that Dr. McMurtry's website is at the bottom of the screen, and there's quite a lot of information on that website. We are condensing a lot of what you're actually sharing with us today, but there are DVDs available on the website, and it will be explained in greater detail if you purchase the DVD. There are also some fantastic articles on the website.
Well, yes, Pastor, on our website, creationworldview.org, we not only have DVDs, but we have CDs, audio CDs for people who are driving, and we don't want them to be distracted by pictures. We have books, but we have books and DVDs that cover from ages 2 to 102. I think that will include everybody. We have specific subjects. We have general books, so forth. We have some general DVDs, but we also have, most of the DVDs are specific. And not all the material is mine. You know, I have a couple of books of mine. I have 19 DVDs that are mine, 8 CDs. But we also carry very good materials by other trusted, reliable creation scientists. And so we use a multitude of authors. It's not all just mine.
Yep.
And so we have a broad spectrum. And when you go to our website and you go to the bookstore, you know, say these are CDs, these are DVDs, these are books, and then it's age graded, so that you will know, well, these books are appropriate for the young ones at age 2 to, say, 8. These are appropriate only for adults, really, or high school students and so forth. And so it's age graded. That helps you to know. And then we have the free articles, and I always like to stress that. These are articles that you can read for free, you can email them for free, you can print them for free, and these are articles, most of which that I have written, but again, we have some articles by others. And I would point out to you that all of my materials are really at the very popular level. I write the way I speak.
Yeah.
Anybody with a 5th, 6th grade education or higher can read any of the articles that I have written. And the same thing is true of a couple of other articles that we have by other authors. Now, there is a small technical section, clearly marked, that these papers are technical. And, only unless you really want the highfalutin kind of stuff, the ivory tower stuff, these are for you. There's not very many, but we have some, because we also want to have things like that. And I have material from Russian scientists, from people who, we have one author from the UK, we have South Africa, so we're taking the best that we can from different sources. My colleague, who's under my ministry in the Ukraine, we have a ministry that's worldwide. He's written an article, for instance. And our website is not only in English, but it's also in Russian. So because I do a lot of mission work in Russia, I go to Russia twice a year. And we are trying to get the website translated into Portuguese. And so later this year, we're going to start to have some things that can be read in Portuguese.
Excellent.
I have one DVD that's available, that's a good starter DVD, covering 3 subjects as an introduction to creation in 3 subjects. It's an hour long. That is in 8 languages.
Incredible.
So, of course, it defaults to English, but you have 7 other choices. So, Spanish, Portuguese,
Dr. McMurtry, what I would like to do in part 3 is just to give you time to get ready. You talked about, not that you need time to get ready because you're a wealth of information. Obviously, your upbringing in Berkeley, no doubt as an evolutionist, you at one time taught that all humans evolved from an ape-like ancestor. So that's what we're going to look at in part 3. So please join with us in part 3.